2. Columbian Exchange, Triangular Trade, and East India Companies. Introduction. The Age of Exploration, spanning the 15th to the 17th centuries, marked a transformative period in global history. This era was characterized by extensive maritime exploration, the establishment of new trade routes, and the rise of powerful trading companies. Central to these developments were the Columbian Exchange, the triangular trade, and the emergence of East India Companies. These phenomena not only reshaped economic landscapes, but also had profound social, cultural, and environmental impacts worldwide. This comprehensive analysis delves into each of these elements, exploring their origins, mechanisms, and lasting consequences. 1. The Columbian Exchange. Definition and scope. The Columbian Exchange refers to the widespread transfer of plants, animals, people, culture, technology, diseases, and ideas between the Americas, New World, and the Afro-Eurasian continents, Old World, following Christopher Columbus's voyages beginning in 1492. This exchange had profound implications for global ecology, agriculture, and population dynamics. Key components: biological exchange. Plants, introduction of crops such as maize, corn, potatoes, tomatoes, cassava, and cacao to Europe, Africa, and Asia significantly altered agricultural practices and diets. Conversely, Old World crops like wheat, rice, sugarcane, and coffee were introduced to the Americas. Animals: Europeans brought horses, cattle, pigs, sheep, and chickens to the New World, transforming indigenous agricultural practices and transportation. The introduction of horses, for example, revolutionized Native American societies by enhancing mobility and hunting capabilities. Disease transfer. Diseases such as smallpox, influenza, measles, and typhus were inadvertently brought to the Americas by Europeans. These diseases decimated indigenous populations, leading to demographic collapses and facilitating European colonization. Cultural and technological exchange. The transfer of knowledge, technologies, and cultural practices between the Old and New Worlds fostered significant societal changes. For instance, European firearms and metal tools were introduced to the Americas, while Native American agricultural techniques influenced European farming. Impact of the Columbian Exchange. Demographic shifts. The introduction of European diseases resulted in the dramatic decline of indigenous populations in the Americas, with estimates suggesting a reduction of up to 90 in some regions. Economic transformation. The introduction of lucrative crops like sugar and tobacco to Europe and the Americas fueled the rise of plantation economies and the demand for slave labor, laying the groundwork for the transatlantic slave trade. Environmental changes. The introduction of non-native species led to ecological disruptions. For example, European livestock often overgrazed native landscapes, altering ecosystems and biodiversity. Cultural syncretism. The blending of indigenous and European cultures gave rise to new cultural practices, languages, and social structures in the Americas. 2. Triangular trade. Definition and structure. The triangular trade was a transatlantic trading system that connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas from the 16th to the 19th centuries. This system facilitated the exchange of goods, enslaved people, and raw materials, forming a three-leg journey that was economically profitable for European powers. The three legs of the triangular trade. Europe to Africa. European goods such as textiles, guns, alcohol, and manufactured items were shipped to Africa. These goods were exchanged for enslaved Africans, who were often captured through local conflicts or raids. Africa to the Americas Middle Passage. Enslaved Africans were transported across the Atlantic to the Americas under horrific conditions. This leg, known as the Middle Passage, was notorious for its high mortality rates due to disease, malnutrition, and brutal treatment. Americas to Europe. Raw materials produced in the Americas, such as sugar, tobacco, cotton, rum, and molasses, were shipped back to Europe. These commodities were essential for European industries and consumer markets. Economic significance. Capital accumulation. The triangular trade was instrumental in the accumulation of capital in European economies, particularly in Britain, Spain, Portugal, France, and the Netherlands. Profits from the sale of raw materials and manufactured goods fueled industrial growth and infrastructure development. Growth of plantation economies. The demand for labor-intensive crops like sugar and cotton led to the establishment and expansion of plantation economies in the Caribbean, Brazil, and the southern United States, reliant on enslaved labor. Development of financial institutions. The complexities and scale of the triangular trade spurred the growth of financial institutions, including banks, insurance companies, and joint stock companies, to manage investments and risks, social and human costs, enslavement, and human suffering. The triangular trade was built on the enslavement and exploitation of millions of Africans. Families were torn apart, and individuals endured inhumane conditions, with long-lasting social and psychological impacts on African communities. Cultural displacement. Enslaved Africans were forcibly removed from their homelands, leading to the loss of languages, traditions, and cultural identities. However, African cultural elements persisted and influenced the cultures of the Americas. Racial hierarchies. The establishment of racial hierarchies and systemic racism in the Americas was a direct consequence of the institution of slavery, effects of which are still felt today. Abolition and legacy. Abolition movements, growing moral opposition, economic changes, and resistance from enslaved people led to abolitionist movements in Europe and the Americas. Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807 and slavery itself in 1833, followed by other nations. Economic shifts. The decline of the triangular trade necessitated economic adjustments, including the rise of wage labor and industrialization, particularly in Europe. Historical impact. The triangular trade left an indelible mark on global history, shaping demographic patterns, economic structures, and social relations across continents. 3. East India Companies, emergence and purpose. East India Companies were powerful joint stock enterprises established by European nations to facilitate and monopolize trade with Asia, particularly India and Southeast Asia. The most notable among these were the British East India Company founded in 1600, the Dutch East India Company VOC, founded in 1602, the French East India Company founded in 1664, and the Portuguese Estado de India established in the late 15th century. Structure and operations. Joint stock model. These companies operated on a joint stock basis, allowing investors to purchase shares and share in profits and losses. This model spread financial risks and enabled the accumulation of substantial capital for large-scale ventures. Monopolistic practices. East India companies were often granted monopolies over trade in specific regions by their home governments. They wielded significant political and military power to protect and expand their commercial interests, administrative and military functions. Beyond trade, these companies administered territories, collected taxes, maintained armies, and engaged in diplomatic relations. For example, the British East India Company effectively ruled large parts of India until the mid-19th century. Economic impact, control of trade routes. East India companies established and controlled key maritime trade routes, ensuring the steady flow of valuable commodities such as spices, textiles, tea, and opium to Europe. Industrial influence. The influx of raw materials like cotton and silk from Asia fueled European industries, particularly textiles, contributing to the Industrial Revolution. Wealth accumulation. These companies generated immense wealth for their shareholders and home nations, facilitating further economic expansion and the development of financial markets. Political and social influence. Colonial expansion. East India companies played pivotal roles in the colonization of Asia. Their military and administrative capabilities allowed them to establish and maintain control over vast territories. Cultural exchange and conflict. The presence of these companies led to significant cultural exchanges, but also conflicts, including wars and resistance from local populations. The British East India Company's involvement in the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857 is a notable example. Legal and governance systems. These companies introduced new legal and administrative systems in the regions they controlled, often undermining or replacing existing local governance structures. Technological and navigational advancements. Maritime technology. The operations of East India companies spurred advancements in shipbuilding, navigation, and maritime logistics, enhancing the efficiency and safety of long-distance sea voyages. Mapping and cartography. Detailed maps and navigational charts were developed to facilitate trade routes, contributing to the broader field of cartography and geographical knowledge. Legacy and decline. Economic foundations. The success of East India companies laid the groundwork for modern multinational corporations, demonstrating the potential of joint stock enterprises and global trade networks. Colonial legacy. The political and economic structures established by these companies had long-lasting effects on colonized regions, influencing contemporary economic and political landscapes.